Welcome to the Coffee with Father Barry podcast. In each episode, we'll chat with Father Barry Fisher about his 50 years spent serving the Lord as a missionary priest of the precious blood. Christ's call took him around the globe, from the United States to Latin America, to Rome, Austria, and beyond. Father Barry hopes that through sharing his stories, you too will be inspired to reflect on your own unique faith journey. We're so excited to begin this podcast, and welcome to our premiere episode. My name is Sarah Getman, and I will be your guide for today's episode. Today we'll be discussing Father Barry's priestly vocation. And so, Father Barry, we want to start out with a question about your priesthood. So, last year we celebrated your Jubilee, which means you have been a priest for 50 years. Could you tell us a little bit about when you began to hear the call to become a priest?
Certainly. 50 years ago, so I have to recall a lot of things. It's a long time. I was in grade school. I was one of those what we call lifer. I started out real early, and I've been all my life in this. I recall that when I was in grade school, the parish priest would offer, or he would give a talk to the boys of the school, of the grade school. And we went over to church, and he would give this talk on vocations. And one day, when I came back from the talk, I was in third grade, and I was sort of excited. I told the sister, had Franciscan sisters teaching, and I said, I would like to be a priest, and she's all excited. So she said, well, why don't you go over to the rectory and tell Father you want to be a priest? So I went over to the rectory, and I remember ringing the doorbell, and Father Paul Almond was his name. He opened the door, and Paul was a tall guy, and I remember I was just a little squirt. And I looked up, and he seemed so big. And he said, yes, what can I do for you? And I said, well, Father, I heard your talk in church today, and I just wanted to tell you I want to be a priest someday. He says, oh, really? Well, why don't you come back after 8th grade, and we'll talk about that. So that was the extent of that conversation. So I went back and told Sister, and she was very excited about it. Anyway, that was my first moment when I expressed to somebody that I wanted to someday maybe be a priest. I was, as a young boy, I was very excited about church. I liked going to church, to Mass, benediction, way of the cross, confession, and all the works. And in school, in grade school, we would have Mass. Now, I'm talking about the 50s. It would have been 1950s. We had Mass every day. So before like 10 of 8 in the morning. So I would always go to the Mass. And then when we went back to the school after Mass, those of us who went to communion had our little lunch boxes. Those are collector's items today. They're those little tin boxes. I might have a Royal Rogers, Daniel Boone, or Mickey Mouse or something. And we would be able to sit at our desks, and for maybe 10 minutes, we were allowed to eat our breakfast, a little sandwich or a little thermos of hot chocolate. Anyway, that's how we did it in those days. Besides being interested in the things of the church, I just liked it, Eventually, I became an altar server, and I served the altar board, we said, and I served eventually about everything that ever happened in the church until I went to the seminary. But I also remember as a kid, across the street from where we lived, I would see this car pull up, and a priest get out of the car and visit this one home. And one day I asked my mom, and I said, who is that? That's Father Lipinski, our parish assistant. I said, oh, and he's visiting this family. And that impressed me because that first impression of a priest who was not just in church, but also connected with the people, that attracted me. The other time, we had another parish priest, also, he was a precious blood priest, by the way, and I had another precious blood priest who was young, just recently ordained, and he would come out to the schoolyard, with the school was across the street from the rectory, with his cassock and cross and all that, our official attire. And he would jump rope with the girls and play. He would just participate. His humanity impressed me. So those two things, first of all, impressed me very much. And alongside of that, as I was throughout grade school, I wanted to help people. That was an attraction. My first inkling maybe that I could do something to serve people and help people through the priesthood. And one of the things I did when I was in grade school, I think toward the 7th grade, 8th grade, I was interested in the lives of the saints. And so I decided to make like a little newsletter. That was only in 7th, 8th grade. And what I did was I looked at the little Roman missal I had, that we had in those days, and take who are the saints that were celebrating this week or the next 2 weeks, and I put that on there, and the date and who it was, whether it was a martyr or a virgin or whatever, and a little synopsis of his life. And then I, with the help of my Aunt S., we produced like a 1 or 2 pages, probably was a 2-page like newsletter with those saints on it and a prayer. Now the reproduction in those days was not like today on your computer. You can press a button and it prints out on a printer. We had to be very inventive. It was a time when we used what is the technical term, and now I've just found it, was hectograph. It was like a jelly plate. It was a plate you would buy, I forget how we actually did it, but we'd buy some packet of like a gelatin powder and mix it, put it in a plate, like a cookie plate, and let it sit in the fridge overnight, and it would become like a Jell-O, a little bit more firm than Jell-O. Then I would type up. My one cousin had an old typewriter in those days. I would type up this newsletter with a carbon copy. And that carbon copy you would place on the jelly plate, smooth it out, and then lift it off. And the print would be on the jelly plate. And then one by one, we would put a blank page on that, smooth it out, lift it off, and there it was printed. And we did this for 50 students that I had in my class. So it was quite an operation. But it was something that I wanted to do for the class to, in a sense, evangelize a little bit, share my faith and my belief, and hoping that it would turn some people on, I guess. But I love going to church. I love doing all those things. And I think that was like the beginning of my desire to be a priest, to do something that I could serve others.
Wow. What a good story. And awesome to hear how present that desire was from the very beginning of your education. And also, like, what commitment from your aunt to help you with that. That's so beautiful. Thank you. And so something else that you mentioned, that one of the priests that you observed was a precious blood priest, but you are a missionary of the precious blood. And could you tell us a little bit about why you chose that religious order?
Yes. When I was growing up, in our parish, we had all of our assistant priests were precious blood priests. The pastors were diocesan, but after the war, the diocese had a shortage of priests, and so it invited our men to come in as assistants to the pastor. So when I was in grade school, all of our assistants were precious blood. So when I mentioned already 2 of the precious blood priests, we had 3 actually, because the first priest I told I went to be a priest was a precious blood, then the other 2 as well. So that their humanity and their closeness to the people, that was something that attracted me. I also got to know another priest, Father Wizard, who was the chaplain of a convent outside of town of the Adorers of the Blood of Christ. And he became then my more immediate mentor and sponsor to enter the seminary. Now, why did I go to the precious blood? As a child or as a young kid in grade school, I wanted to investigate different possibilities of where to study and where to become a priest. And so in those days, we didn't have internet, obviously. So I would go to the church rack, the book rack in the back of church, pull out different magazines, and look for the advertisements of become a Trinitarian, become a Redemptorist, become a Precious Blood. And so I noticed that the Precious Blood community had what they called a vocation workshop. And that was like, the basic idea was you go to the seminary and live like a seminarian for a week. They have the basic schedule of classes, sports, work, and everything. And so that attracted me, and I thought, I got my parents' permission, and I applied to go there. And I went there then after the 7th grade. I spent a week at that seminary in Ohio, Brunardale Seminary, and I really enjoyed that week, and I thought this is something that I might like to do and where I like to go to study. Now, again, at this stage, to go after grade school, I was not even 14 years old yet. And so today that seemed, wow, how can you 14 years old, you knew what you wanted to do? Well, yeah, some people wanted to be a policeman, others a fireman, others a military. I wanted to be a priest, So that's something, but I didn't have, if you asked me for some really deep motivation, that wasn't there at that time. It was something that attracted me and I enjoyed and wanted to become a priest. So when I was in 8th grade, the bishop got wind that myself and another classmate wanted to go to the Precious Blood Seminary. He actually told the pastor, bring them up. I want to talk to them. Now, in those days, talking to the bishop was another world. I mean, it was, and we called him, I don't know who might hear this, but we called him Gorgeous George because he was really a fancy dresser, his shoes, patent leather shoes, and he was very, So anyway, we went up, and I remember going up there in the car. George and I, we were sitting in the back seat. We were scared to death. I mean, go to see the bishop in his office in Harrisburg, which is the diocese we're in. Anyway, we got there, got out of the car, and we were showed up to the bishop's suite and opened the door, and we were told to go in. The bishop was on the far end of the room with his fancy desk and chairs. And George and I, we shuffled across that carpet. It was one of those thick, fuzzy carpets in those days. And we knelt down to kiss his ring because he was very formal. And I'd kissed it. And then George, it was his turn. He got down and he had built up such a charge of static electricity when he kissed that ring, it just about knocked him on the floor. And of course, that was the beginning of that interview. Well, the interview was very simple. The bishop said, I hear you're going to the Precious Blood. Why? Why not to my diocese? And I told him about this vocation workshop. He said, what is that? What did you do? So I explained the dynamics of that. And anyway, he thanked us and we left. But years later, they instituted something similar to that in the diocese. And so maybe it did some good. But that was, and that's after 8th grade, we left for the seminary for Brunardale in Ohio.
All right. Thank you so much for getting that story started for us. The saga will continue very soon. And thank you for joining us today for today's episode of Coffee with Father Barry. Thank you for joining us for Coffee with Father Barry. We hope you enjoyed these stories. Know of our prayers for you as we continue this wonderful adventure with Christ as missionary disciples.